Let's talk a little bit about writing textual analysis and specifically how to sharpen focus in those essays. So the most difficult part of writing a textual analysis is creating sharp, clear focus in the whole essay and in the individual body paragraphs. However, a clear, precise thesis statement and clear topic sentences mark the essential difference between a successful and an unsuccessful paper for this particular assignment. Additionally, the drafting and revision processes become significantly easier if the writer knows clearly where he or she is going with a clear focus from the beginning of the drafting process or early in the drafting process. So let's assume at this point that you've chosen two works or essays that you plan to write about. Likely you've chosen to write about these because you found these personally appealing in some way, and you already have some kind of idea about how these essays overlap. Okay. To illustrate how to move from general subject to specific claim, I'm going to use two of Walt Whitman's poems or collections called Song of Myself, and the other one's called Drum Taps. You may not have read these works, but it doesn't matter for our purposes. We're concerned now with general concepts about thesis and topic sentence construction. So let's start with the identification of subjects about which to write. So this is step one in the process. So the following statements here that you're going to see are summary statements. That is, they merely state generalities about the two works and don't move towards analysis. So something like death is a common topic in Walt Whitman's Song of Myself and Drum Taps is a summary statement. Walt Whitman's Song of Myself and Drum Taps are about death. The theme of death is present in Walt Whitman's Song of Myself and Drum Taps. Walt Whitman discusses much about death in Song of Myself and Drum Taps. So the above statements are fine as baseline starting points. Something like this would be useful as a tentative thesis, a first effort at a thesis statement. However, these and other similar statements simply aren't acceptable as thesis statements, even for a rough draft. And so why is that? These statements aren't making a debatable claim about the two texts. To put it simply, these are summary statements that are like saying the sky is blue while the grass is green. That statement isn't substantive, analytical, or useful for college level thinking. So once we've identified subjects about which to write, we want to move towards making analytical claims about those particular topics. So below is an important question that you ought to ask yourself that's going to help you move from general subject to specific claim. So in this work, what does the author suggest or claim about my chosen subject? Or what is the author's view of the chosen subject? Right. So for Walt Whitman examples above, I would ask the two following questions. Let's say I've identified death as the subject I want to talk about with these two works. So I would ask the following two questions. In Song of Myself, what does Walt Whitman suggest or claim about death? And in Drum Taps, what does Walt Whitman suggest or claim about death? The answer to this question should move your thesis statement more towards analysis rather than summary. And to emphasize, if you are writing about theme, this is the essential question that you need to be answering. So I would strongly encourage you to make sure your thesis statement clearly addresses this particular question in bold here as you move forward with your essay. So step two, moving towards analysis, we have a couple of notes here, right? So the first is on constructing your claims. Right. Another way to think about this sort of sharpening and moving towards analysis revolves around how you construct your thesis statement and your topic sentences. So in this particular statement, you should move from, or in this particular step, you should move from writes about or is about kind of constructions to claims that or suggest that kind of constructions. Right. So for example, Walt Whitman's Song of Myself and Drum Taps are about death would move towards something like, in Song of Myself, Walt Whitman suggests death is a positive experience, while in drum taps he suggests that death is a negative experience. If you find yourself using constructions like is about or writes about or similar kind of constructions, you haven't moved yet from summary to analysis, right? So again, stated here, if you find yourself using is about, writes about, that's summary, not analysis. Note 2 on tone and mood. Remember that text, well, some of you, first of all, may want to choose to write about tone and mood. We've discussed these elements elsewhere, but I want to touch briefly on how to move towards analytical statements with those particular areas, tone and mood. So if you're going to do that, ask yourself the following questions. With tone, what is the speaker's attitude or feeling towards the subject? And with mood, what feeling or emotion does the writer want the audience to have? So remember that texts may and very often do have multiple tones and multiple moods. Any shift in tone or mood is also significant to the text. So for example, the very last line in E.B. White's Once More to the Lake represents a significant shift in both tone and mood. And that distinct change, even though it's a really brief one, a short sentence, helps readers to grasp the overall theme of the essay. So finally, again, keep in mind that analysis of tone and mood is based primarily on analysis of diction, which is word choice. So when you're analyzing tone and mood, you are analyzing how the writer uses diction, uses particular words to evoke feeling, right, or to indicate a particular feeling. So step 3 in sharpening your focus for this kind of paper is to move to a specific and narrow analytical statement about the essays at hand. So once you have an analytical statement, just a general analytical statement, you want to ensure that that thesis statement is specific and that your topic sentences are narrow, right? So please note that if you've asked yourself the question above, that is, in this work, what does the author suggest or claim about my chosen subject? That was the question I told you that was in bold. That's a very important question. If you've asked that, then you should have come up with something that's fairly specific. However, I often see statements that are getting towards analysis but aren't specific enough. So if you have made a solid effort in answering that previous question, it's possible you could skip this step, but I want to illustrate this just because, again, I often see statements that are getting towards analysis but aren't quite there yet. So let's say you've got something like the following. In Song of Myself, Walt Whitman suggests that death is a positive experience, while in Drum Taps he suggests that death is a negative experience. Again, this statement is getting towards analysis, but it isn't specific and narrow, and so it's not a successful thesis statement. Words and phrases like positive experience and negative experience are vague. They point the reader in a general direction, but they don't give, again, specific, clear claim about the text. So following are a few tips to help you move from vague and broad statements to specific and narrow claims. Okay. So tactic 1 is use specific words, right? So in both thesis statement and topic sentences, words and phrases that are use words and phrases that are specific rather than vague. So tell the reader exactly what your claim is. So to help with this, you can look at your thesis statement and ask the questions, in what way, or how do we know? Those questions might help sharpen your statements to a useful point. So I've got the initial statement. In Song of Myself, Walt Whitman suggests death is a positive experience, while in Drum Taps he suggests death is a negative experience. So I might ask, in what way is death a positive experience in Song of Myself, and in what way is it a negative experience in Drum Taps? So that might result in something like the following. In Song of Myself, Whitman suggests that death ought to be celebrated and not feared, while in Drum Taps, death is seen as a destructive, violent event that results in deep sorrow. This statement is a little bit more specific, but if I want to dig even deeper, I can ask why and come up with something maybe like this. In Song of Myself, Whitman suggests that death ought to be celebrated and not feared because it represents a rebirth and return to the universal stream of life. While in drum taps, death is seen as a specific violent event that results in deep sorrow because it results in suffering of humans whom Whitman views as divine beings. Now again, this is more specific. It tells the reader more exactly where we're going. However, this statement is a little bit clunky and wordy, so maybe we can revise it to something like this. In Song of Myself, Whitman suggests that death ought to be celebrated without fear, as it represents a return to the universal divinity, while in Drum Taps, death is seen as a destructive, sorrowful event, as it results in the suffering of humans whom Whitman views as divine beings. It's possible we could sharpen this even further, but this is a little bit less wordy, and you get the idea. I've eliminated redundant words. I've included only specific language that I plan on dealing with later. So this is a specific, narrow statement which achieves clarity and is getting towards conciseness. Tactic 2 here would be to use keywords, all right, as we're moving towards a specific and narrow focus. This is especially true as you're constructing your topic sentences, as the key words in those topic sentences are connective tissue between your thesis statement and the body paragraphs. So in Song of Myself, Whitman suggests death ought to be celebrated without fear, as it represents a return to universal divinity, while in Drum Taps, death is seen as a destructive, sorrowful event, as it results in the suffering of humans whom Whitman views as divine beings. In this statement, I've highlighted the key words: death, without fear, return to divinity, universal divinity, destructive, sorrowful, suffering of humans, divine beings. These are important terms or phrases that readers are going to expect to see in my topic sentences, and that are going to be the connective tissue between the topic sentences, or I'm sorry, between the thesis statement and the body paragraphs. And a final note here: if you're new to writing textual analysis, you might want to consider telling your reader exactly what literary element you plan to discuss. If you plan on discussing tone in a paragraph, tell your reader that. You could start by saying simply, the tone of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself is, and fill in the blank. As you revise the paper, you'd want to sharpen that sentence to something that's a little bit more interesting and unique, but explicitly stating what literary device you plan to, or what literary element you plan to analyze, especially if you're dealing with tone or mood. That can really help your reader and help you as well as you're constructing focus. So good luck as you think about and sharpen your focus in this essay.